Everybody, and welcome to this, my second of 3 videos on the Canon EOS-1D Mark II. In the first video, we looked at what the stuff on the camera is. In this video, we're going to talk about how to use the vast majority of it to take photos with the camera. First thing is, this is a digital camera. You're not doing anything at all with this camera unless you have a good battery in it. So let's change the battery. The battery is this right here, and to change it, you're going to flip this little lever out. You're going to rotate it counter or anti-clockwise, and then the battery will pop out. Some of them you might need to push this button in as well, but with mine it just does that button by itself. So there we go. Take out the battery that was in there, which is a Canon DMC-E3. No, it's a Canon NP E3 is the battery that this uses. The Lenmar has a different designation. I'm going to slide the battery in here now and rotate the lock. And we have now changed the battery successfully. That is, if this one has a charge. Oh, good, it does. So the next thing we're going to do is talk about how to mount and unmount lenses, so you can change lenses to take different types of photos. To remove a lens that's already on the camera, you push the lens release button down and rotate counter or anti-clockwise to remove it. To mount a lens, you find the red index and the red index, line those two up, and turn the lens clockwise until it clicks in place and you've changed your lenses. Next, let's replace the CF card. This can use both SD and CF cards, and you can use them to write to them both at the same time, or use one as a backup, things like that. To change the CF card, you push the CF card ejection button down, remove the CF card, and then you can put a different one in. To change the SD card, you simply push on it, and when it pops up, you pull it out and then put it back in just like that. I could not find the maximum size that this will allow. So the biggest I have is a 16 gig CF card. So it will take at least that size. A 16 gig CF card or SD card will hold around 450 RAW files. Next thing let's talk about is the flash. And the flash has a hot shoe up here, and it also has a PC port under this cover. So the top one right there. So you can connect a flash cable to that PC port. If you are using a digital camera and you think it's a good idea to save a few dollars by buying a 1970s or 80s Vivitar or similar flash, don't do it. Use only modern, newly made flashes with your digital cameras. And the reason being, older flashes are way, way more powerful than modern ones. Like, seriously, like an older flash, if the capacitor was charged up and someone took it apart, it could kill them with some of the flashes because of how powerful the capacitors were. With an old flash like that, if it discharges into your camera, you have destroyed your DSLR. So if you are going to use old flashes like that, make sure you have an RF signaling, an RF thing from your hot shoe to that flash, and that there is no wired or physical connection to your camera. Okay, so any flash that you would get for this camera, you can plug into your hot shoe or your PC port. Just make sure it's a new flash. And then with certain Canon flashes, you have a whole range of functions connecting it to your hot shoe that I'm not an expert in Canon flashes, so but they can do a lot, suffice to say. The flash sync speed on this is 1/250th of a second. And basically what that means is that your shutter curtain, when you shoot at 1/250th of a second, the first curtain opens, and then the sensor is exposed to light for 1/250th of a second, and then the second curtain closes, and then they reset. You can use your flash at any speed slower than that, because flash speed is not governed by how quickly the curtains move, but by the gap that's in between them. So at a 1 second exposure, your first curtain opens, a second goes by, and then the second curtain closes, and then you advance. And the flash defaults to firing when the first curtain finishes its travel, which I only mentioned because we'll talk about that a little bit more in video 3. Next thing let's talk about are the upper control buttons on this camera and what they do and how to use them. And that's these 3 buttons right here. Can I turn this on without looking at it? Yes, I can. Oh, I'm great. Okay, so the 3 buttons are your mode button, your autofocus button, and your exposure compensation metering mode button. So we'll start with the mode button because that's the easiest one. If you hold it down, you can switch with the command dial between aperture priority, full manual, shutter priority, bulb, program, and then back to aperture priority. So we'll talk about what each of these mean. With aperture priority shooting, you use the upper command wheel to set the aperture value of your lens, and then your camera will pick the best shutter speed to go along with that aperture value and use that shutter speed. We'll do manual last. Shutter priority is the opposite. You pick the shutter speed, and the camera will pick the best aperture of the available range to take the photo. And it's flashing, telling us that that shutter speed is too fast for the available light. So we're going to give a slower shutter speed until we have a shutter speed with an aperture that we can use. There we go. Program mode is pretty easy to use. The camera will pick the best shutter speed and aperture for you, and it will just take the photos there. With program mode, oh, battery's dead. I seriously just refreshed this one the other day. One of the problems with old cameras like this, there we go, the button has to work on that one. One of the problems with old DSLRs is that the batteries are all old. A lot of them haven't had their batteries really made in a long time. So it can be an exciting adventure getting one that has a battery that says full charge and then lasts 2 minutes. So program mode, the camera will pick the best shutter speed and aperture for you. If you hold the asterisk button down, you can do program mode shifting and adjust your aperture and shutter speed. You can also, if you hold the exposure compensation button down, intentionally over or underexpose your images even in program mode. Bulb is really simple. You set the aperture yourself. There we go. And when you push the shutter button down, the shutter opens. When you release the shutter button, the shutter closes. With full manual mode, you are in control of everything in the exposure, and whether it turns out well or not, it's your fault. So with full manual mode, you adjust the aperture. Well, we'll see how to set this in video 3. The way this camera is set up, you adjust the aperture using the command wheel on top, and the shutter speed using the command wheel on the back. Command dial, command wheel. In video 3, I'll show you how to reverse that so that this controls the shutter and this controls the aperture, which is the default version interface for Canon. Let's go back to aperture priority because that's what I shoot with most of the time. Next thing we're going to talk about are your autofocus modes. So we'll push the autofocus button down. Where is it? Oh, it would help if I had the camera and the lens switched to autofocus. Okay, autofocus. AI servo and one shot are your 2 options. One shot's a little bit easier to understand. What will happen is it'll gain focus, and then it'll keep taking pictures without changing focus, even if your subject moves in or out from the camera. AI servo, it will gain focus, and then you could see that it was tracking my hand as I pulled it away from the lens, and focus will change between shots as your subject moves in or out from the camera. Next, we'll talk about metering modes and exposure compensation last. We'll talk about drive mode next. By holding down the top and bottom button, we get into our drive modes, and we have high and low continuous shooting, 10-second self-timer and 2-second self-timer, and single frame. So with single frame, it takes one shot, and you can hold your thumb down until you have died and your body has turned to dust, and it will not take another one. With drive, you can switch between high and low, which is just a matter of how many frames per second you want. With low, you can extend the buffer. This can hold 20 or 22, depending on which specific one you have in the buffer. If you use low, you can make the buffer last a little bit longer. 10-second self-timer and 2-second self-timer, pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to leave it in high. That's how I usually shoot. Next, we're going to talk about going into auto exposure bracketing here, holding down these two buttons. And what you can do with auto exposure bracketing is hold them down, and you will, using the command dial or the command wheel, can create auto bracketing of 3 images separated by a number of stops, just like that. Pretty easy to do. Pretty self-explanatory. We'll adjust the ISO next. There we go. I have this set low as 50 ISO, 100 up to 1600, and then high. So you adjust your ISO, it displays on the LCD. I believe it also displays on the, no, it does not display on the lower one. Just displays up here on the top. Whatever you want to use for your ISO is fine. Lastly, we're going to talk about these metering modes. We're going to push this button down here, and the top command dial switches between metering modes. The rear command wheel allows us to intentionally underexpose or overexpose the image if we want to. And this can be good for manual bracketing of images, especially for HDR type shots, or if you want to do a low key or high key shot, for instance. Those are just 2 examples of many good uses of intentionally over or underexposing your images. All right, so this camera has 4 metering modes. They are, there we go. Evaluative is box with circle and dot, or box with stuff in it, as we're going to call it. Partial is box with circle. Spot is box with dot. And center weighted averaging is box with nothing. So let's go through these and talk about what they each are. Evaluative is your standard walk around, very reliable metering mode. It is the standard metering mode and is good for most subjects. It uses the entire viewfinder broken up into a bunch of different zones. I don't have that number written down. And then it uses information from all those zones, including where the focus is placed, to determine the best exposure information for your in-focus subject. Partial metering, which is box with circle, is effective when the background is much brighter than the subject, or much darker. And basically what this does is the central 5 metering zones, which are around the center of the focusing screen, are activated, and it's about 13.5%. And I think it might actually be exactly 13.5% of the focusing screen is used for metering. Spot metering is where things start to get really fun. Spot metering will be less than 4% because this is a crop factor. It's the same size spot meter as a full frame camera, but it's a larger portion of the focusing screen, so it's going to be around 3.8 to 4% of the focusing screen. And basically, this will give you a very small area for very accurate focusing on that area. And in video 3, I believe there's a way to link the spot meter to your active AF point with this camera. And if so, we'll see that in video 3. And then center weighted averaging takes the entire focusing screen area, biases the meter reading towards what's in the center, and then gives you a meter reading off of that. And then yes, you can link the AF point to these in spot metering. You can link the AF point to your spot reading, and that's custom function 13. We'll see that in the video 3. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how some of these are used. Partial metering is really good if you have a subject placed in the center of your frame and you have vastly different tones between the background and the subject. Spot metering, what you can do is you can, if you link it to your autofocus point, then what you do is your autofocus is focused up here. That's what your meter reading is going to be off of. It's a very, very useful tool. And if you're doing portraits, that's the metering mode and setup that you should use because you will properly expose your subject's face no matter where they are in your frame. Center-weighted averaging is just a good general walk around, just like evaluative is. The autofocus point selection button here brings up the autofocus points in your viewfinder. And what you can do is use the top command dial and the rear command wheel to select which autofocus point or group of points you want to use. And then when this symbol comes back in the LCD, this means all autofocus points are active. There we go. And when you have it set to select, that means only select autofocus points are active. So the symbols will tell you different things about which ones. This right here is actually all autofocus points are active. When you're doing autofocus point selection, there will be two tones of illumination for your autofocus point. Bright is more active, dim is less active, if I recall correctly. Changing focusing screens on this camera is really easy. I'm not actually going to do it because I don't have the right tools or one to put back in, but you just flip this little switch here, the focusing screen and tray will drop down. Then there's a tweezers with your new focusing screen. You grab the focusing screen that's in there, take it out, put the new one in, and then use the back side of the tweezers to close the caddy. When you do it, you have to have the camera sitting upright because you need that orientation for everything to sit in place correctly. That's changing the focusing screen. I wish I had the right tools to demonstrate it, but it's really a pretty simple thing to do. The next thing let's do is let's talk about how to take pictures with this camera. What you're going to do is select your shooting mode. We talked about how each of these work. You're just going to select whichever one you want to use, dial in the settings that you want, get your focus, and take your picture. Same thing with selecting your mode, your autofocus mode, bracketing, ISO, whatever it is. Taking a picture is really easy. You just hold the shutter button down halfway to get focus, or manually focus if you want to do it that way, and then take your pictures. Double exposures with this camera, super easy. Just keep taking pictures and make the double exposure in post. I don't think there is a way to do it in camera. If there is, I'm certainly unaware of it. So, but that's okay because doing double exposures in your photo editing software is going to be way more powerful than what this can do in camera. That's it. We've gone over all the functionality of this camera except for the menu systems. So in video 3, that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk in detail about the menus and how this camera, what you can do in this camera's menu system to customize its use for you. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.